Good morning. It is December 26th, 2024. I have a lot of things to discuss today regarding the Panama Canal issue, and then in another video, I'll do the Greenland issue. Talking about is Trump being an imperialist in wanting to take the Panama Canal back, and his ideas on Greenland, which will be in the second part of this. I'm going to start here with the history of the Panama Canal. Try not to get too in the weeds because I had to read all this, and I know you'll probably get bored if I try to read everything in here. So I'm going to try my best to just read what's pertinent to this issue. Okay. Okay, so this is an archive site of the government. They shared some declassified documents in here. And although the canal was officially opened to shipping on August 15, 1914, few realized that the official celebration had to be postponed due to the start of World War I a few weeks later. The official recognition of its completed construction was not celebrated until March 1915. So that's why they had the 100th anniversary in 2015 of the official celebration completing the construction of the canal by the United States. So to celebrate this official recognition, the 100th, the 100th anniversary, the National Declassification Center of NARA focused on recently declassified records in our custody that celebrate what the American Society of Civil Engineers has named the 7th civil engineering wonder of the world, the Panama Canal. Okay, so most of us have heard of the Panama Canal, but we don't really know the United States' role in its construction and maintenance for sure. I mean, I didn't know everything. I barely knew anything. I knew we had something to do with it, but I didn't know all the details. So I'm hoping you'll learn as much as I did when I go through this. The United States' role in its construction and maintenance, let alone the part that it played in our foreign relations with Panama. And debate continues to swirl around issues of why the U.S. turned the canal over to Panama, Panamanian distrust of the U.S. government in general, and the imperialistic image associated with the U.S. employees that administered and lived in the canal zone. Many historians have examined our early pre- and post-construction relations with Panama, but not many have examined the period just prior to the canal turnover. So the records have been recently declassified, focus on that pre-turnover era, and may assist U.S. citizens as well as scholars in understanding the story that led to one of the biggest changes in U.S. policy since the canal was built. So it goes into the whole project that has to do with that. All this information, documents, photographs. So there's they're sharing all that in here. If you want to look at that, you can go to this site, and it's archives.gov. If you want to try to find those letters and all that. I tried to go into one, but had kind of restricted access. But I think you can probably look at one or two. I'm not sure. In any case, the frayed relations between the U.S. and Panama began almost immediately after the signing of the 1903 Varela Treaty that allowed the U.S. to build and maintain the Panama Canal on the Isthmus of Panama. Panama was established as a country with U.S. assistance shortly before the treaty was signed in 1903. Over the years, the Panamanians sought to obtain more equitable provisions from the original treaty than the U.S. was willing to concede. The two countries addressed these issues through adjustments to the original agreement during the treaty negotiations of 1936, 1942, and 1955. Okay, so the need for continued negotiations was due to what the Panamanians viewed as the improper interpretations by the U.S. of the original treaty. These misinterpretations revolved around matters such as the sovereignty issue, the in perpetuity clause, flying the Panamanian flag in the zone, the importing of third-party goods into the zone, the exclusion of Panamanian goods and services from zone markets, and discrimination against Panamanians working in the zone. The U.S., on the other hand, felt that the Panamanians viewed the canal as, quote, their meal ticket, end quote, and exploited it accordingly. So most Panamanians were convinced that the United States did not deal with them fairly and felt a high sense of frustration with Panama's failure to obtain adjustments in the Canal Treaty structure that would favor Panama's interests. Panama deeply objected to the exercise of sovereign powers by the United States in the Canal Zone and considered the situation an affront to her national dignity. The following documents illustrate Panamanian reaction to this situation. Unfortunately, if I try to bring this up, it's so blurry I can't read it. But if you want to go into those these sites here, you might be able to look at that closely. So, if the United States wanted to improve its relations with Panama, it had to recognize that there were real misunderstandings concerning the treaties, that these misunderstandings needed to be addressed, and that U.S. basic rights concerning the zone needed to be altered in some way to benefit Panama. Recently declassified records focus on issues such as whether or not the U.S. needed to make concessions, what type of concessions, the extent to which Panama needed to be involved in the canal's operation, and Panama's economic link to the canal zone. So the constant back and forth of what the treaties allowed or didn't allow created tension between the countries. What follows is a sample of the various documents that focus on this issue. And there's that you can go to. Okay. In addition to the treaty issues, the day-to-day zone operations and living conditions between Panamanians and zone officials and employees also created tension. The United States ambassador was charged with the responsibility for the conduct of relations with Panama. However, there were other U.S. government agencies in the zone which also affected relations with Panama. This included the governor of the zone, who was also president of the Panama Canal Company, and the military as represented by the Commander-in-Chief Caribbean Command, later known as the United States Southern Command, SOUTHCOM. These organizations operated independently of each other and did not always consult with each other before determining policy or acting on that policy. The following documents focus that, so they share that. The canal civilian officials were accused of discriminating against the Panamanian labor force in the zone, while the U.S. citizens that worked on the zone, known as Zonians, were seen as having colonial attitudes when dealing with Panamanians. The presence of U.S. troops in military installations was seen as an affront by the local Panamanians to their sovereignty. Whether Panama was or was not treated as a territory or a colony deeply colored the U.S. relations with Panama and affected social and economic interactions between the countries. The following documents highlight the situation. Okay. So they had, between 1959 and 1964, they had overt riots, demonstrations against U.S. presence on the isthmus. So the 1959 demonstrations took place first, but they're not as cited as much as the 1964 demonstrations. They're better known and are highlighted often to show Panamanian displeasure with the U.S. They tried to, President Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson attempted to address Panamanian violence and demonstrations prior to 1964. In response to the 1959 violence, President Eisenhower issued an announcement of a 9-point program to improve relations between the United States and Panama. The program called for such things as pay increases and improved housing for the Panamanian employees, and increased pensions for disabled former employees. However, the program failed to institute changes prior to 1964. The following documents focus that. So in 1964, that's the one that's well known. I didn't know about it, but it's well known overall compared to the other one, saw more riot and mob violence. The riots revolved around not allowing the Panamanian flag to fly next to the U.S. flag at the Balboa High School, even though an agreement had been reached sometime in 1962 under President JFK to allow the Panamanian flag to be flown alongside the American flag at civilian locations. This order was not carried out. Therefore, that's not good. On January 9, 1964, with the Panamanian flag still not being flown next to the U.S. flag at Balboa High School, some of the Panamanian students decided to march to the entrance of the canal zone to show their displeasure. As you can see, there's a article there that you can view if you go in here. What resulted were 3 days of riots, destruction of $2 million worth of property, and at least 20 people killed. Panama broke off relations with the U.S. and accused them of aggression and appealed to the Organization of American States and the United Nations. This incident was used as a rallying cry among Panamanians against U.S. authority in the Canal Zone. On December 18, 1964, President Johnson issued a statement announcing that the United States would proceed with plans for a sea-level canal and would negotiate with Panama a new treaty to replace the Treaty of 1903. The following documents highlight that. Okay. In the meantime, experts were to determine the need for another canal through 1980, and attempts would be made to give the Panamanians, according to Department of State officials, quotes, enough more or less meaningless concessions over the next few years to keep them from raising too much hell over the issue. Concessions were always a negotiating point, both sides used as leverage against the other as shown in the documents. Okay. Now here is the U.S. foreign policy. The canal, okay, so they had internal political problems in Panama. Both sides saw the canal dispute as an explosive issue that could disrupt the upcoming treaty negotiations. The treaty negotiations in 1964 became a campaign issue in the Panamanian elections. Various Panamanian political groups used the names of the U.S. and the canal as reminders to the voters that they have been treated as a territory or colony and not as a sovereign partner as promised in the 1903 treaty. I think this is a key issue. They felt like they were under a colony, like colonized by the U.S. after the U.S. helped them to get their own country, their own independence. They felt they didn't really have total independence. They felt like they were a territory colony underneath the U.S. Overseers. And this is a problem because in our history, it usually has been that case. If you look at the history of the Philippines and how we treated them, and how we got Hawaii, how we acquired Hawaii, how we acquired Puerto Rico. In any case, that's a main sticking point right there. So each group was going back and forth on that. It had a fear. Panamanian national opinion on the need for change in the United States-Panamanian Canal relationship was so fierce that no Panamanian government, no matter its political makeup, could avoid not taking a strongly nationalistic stand on the treaty question. Therefore, the U.S. felt pressure to be seen as negotiating in good faith. To be seen otherwise could be used as campaign rhetoric to cause the population to take to the streets, to riot, to show their dissatisfaction with the current treaty situation and U.S. presence in their country. Let's see. Major candidates for this election were Marco Robles and Arnulfo Arias. So they used their campaigns to remind the U.S. that favorable treaty conditions and economic concessions would calm the Panamanian electorate and ensure successful treaty negotiations to be possible. So in May 1st, 1964, Robles was narrowly elected. Arias charged that the election was fraudulent, but the charges were never proven. So so Arias and his Panamanista party remained opposed to the Robles government. Anyway, they go through all of this back and forth issue. It wasn't until 1967 that their draft treaties were unveiled to the Panamanian population. The 3 draft treaties concerned a new Panama Canal Treaty Base Rights and Status of Forces Agreement, and a treaty for the building of a new sea-level canal in Panama. The draft treaty gave Panama its desire for sovereignty over the zone, but it had not deleted the section on the continuation of the presence of U.S. military bases in the zone and the U.S. right to deploy troops and armaments anywhere in the Republic. Okay, again, this is an important point. Well, you know, there's many countries in the world that have military bases, but I know some of them, at least, do not want us there. Okinawa is one of them. Okinawa in Japan. They don't want us there. They haven't wanted us there for decades. So here, the Panamanians are feeling basically the same way. So the inclusion of language allowing the presence of military bases in the zone made the treaty unacceptable to Panamanians. Yeah. The National Assembly did not ratify the draft treaties. So they're going on about all the voters and the campaigns, and in that year of 67, I believe, or 68. Robles would not run again for office, but supported the candidacy of David Samudio as president. Samudio was seen as a political ally of Robles and a political target for former critics of the Robles government. Political groups such as the Communists and the Ultranationalists would use the unpopular terms negotiated earlier by the Robles administration, as well as the continued slow-moving negotiations against David Samudio, saying that he would do more of the same. So, you know, the usual political stuff that goes on in countries. Then the opposition candidate was the same one, Arnulfo Arias, as you can see him here. Okay, so Arias had carried the election. Now, Arias took office October 1st, 1960, demanding the immediate return of the Canal Zone to Panamanian jurisdiction and announcing a change in the leadership of the National Guard. President Arias removed the two most senior officers, and selected Colonel Bolivar Urrutia to command the Guard. October 11, 68, the Guard staged a coup and removed Arias from the presidency. Overthrow of Arias provoked student demonstrations and rioting in some of the slum areas of Panama City. However, the Guard retained control of the country during and after the rioting. Internal political issues in Panama involving the installing of a military junta, but the treaty negotiations in limbo until 1971. In the years between treaty negotiations, U.S. officials contemplated various changes in policy that would create a treaty more agreeable to Panama, such as the reduction of defense forces or naming a civilian governor. Also, between negotiations, the plan for a sea-level canal was eliminated. In 1965, it was thought that a new canal would be needed soon due to the increase in the size of commercial vessels, but the U.S. did not know where to build such a canal, and by the early 70s, the U.S. was unsure that there needed to be one. Thus, the three-treaty package was no longer realistic. Once the sovereignty and perpetuity issues were resolved, attention would be fixed once again on that part of the treaty negotiations dealing with military bases. So, later in 71, Panama and the U.S. agreed to resume negotiations and spent 6 months on what all thought was an acceptable treaty package. However, nothing was done with the negotiated package from December 71 to December 72. Negotiations were resumed again in 73. At this time, General Omar Torrijos, leader of Panama, confronted the U.S. with demands for virtual elimination of U.S. presence in the zone by century's end. On the U.S. side, conservative opinion hardened and held to the position that the U.S. had to safeguard its defense and economic interests in the zone. However, the world community pressured the U.S. to be more conciliatory to Panamanians Panamanian demands for more economic concessions in the form of a sizable alliance for international development aid program. Also, the U.S. offered increased promotional trade efforts to keep lines of negotiations open. So, during these years of negotiations, the Panamanians were not the only group in interest in the treaty negotiations. The U.S. Congress, the Zonians, and U.S. labor organizations were also putting pressure on the negotiations to get terms more favorable to U.S. employees' interest. The American canal workers called for the U.S. government to protect them from losing what many outsiders saw as their cushy jobs and work benefits, which included such things as paid health insurance, 25% tropical differential, generous vacation time, duty-free shopping, and low-subsidized rents and utilities. It did not help that the Canal Zone public relations operation sent mixed signals to its workers. By praising the virtues of canal operations, it encouraged the zone residents to resist change and cherish the status quo instead of embracing the change that canal officials were leaning toward. The U.S. House was influenced by an active lobby of U.S. citizen Canal Zone employees. Oh yeah, see, way back then they had the lobbyists that were being the Congress was influenced by, many of whom were second and third generation residents of the zone and who fought any erosion of their rights, in quotes. The U.S. Senate tended to side with the shippers who wanted low tolls. Department of State officials faced the dubious job of getting the Panamanians happy, of keeping the Panamanians happy while keeping the Congress quiet. So they have documents here. Many critics of U.S. policy toward Panama saw as the die-hard inflexibility that afflicted the Zonians, the United States public in general, and the Congress. So the military affairs. Military activity in the 1960s, military activities in the zone were under the direction of the United States Southcom. Their primary mission was defending the canal. In addition, Southcom served as the nerve center for a wide range of military activities in Latin America, including communications, training Latin American military personnel, overseeing United States military assistance advisory groups, and conducting joint military exercise with Latin American forces, as well as conducting a jungle operation training center and an Inter-American Air Force Academy. However, the command's activities were not welcomed. No, and in the 1970s, our special ops military helped, as you can see, it started training then, but helped train the death squads in certain South American countries. It was terrible. One continuing issue related to the treaties was the presence and function of U.S. military bases. United States military forces constituted a large presence on the isthmus. The military was a potential consumer of goods as well as an employer of the civilian workforce, of which 70% were Panamanian nationals. However, Panamanians continued to question the need for U.S. military bases. To many, the military bases were more closely linked to the control and suppression of civilian populations and not to the defense of the canal. The U.S. supported the continued presence of the military on the isthmus not only as a defensive stance, but also presented their presence as an economic plus for the Panamanian economy. The Panamanians pointed out that they were capable of providing canal defense themselves, and that much of the military activities were questionable and inappropriate under the original treaty agreements, as amended, such as the conducting of the military training exercise, jungle warfare, and environmental testing. As of late 71, U.S. military officials wanted language in the treaty to safeguard its right to defend the canal unilaterally and conduct specific military activities such as creating military schools and military training. Panamanians were vehemently against U.S. forces on the isthmus for several reasons, one of which was the military support of the Panamanian National Guard. In the 1960s, the U.S. military trained most of the Guard's officers and NCOs, non-commissioned officers, at the School of the Americas in the most up-to-date ways in controlling unruly crowds. The Guard also is equipped with arms and supplies from the U.S. So the National Guard is basically the Panama's police force. And that would be kind of scary if you had another country's military base in your country and they were training your police force. That police force is no longer part of the community, the Panamanian community. It's learning from training from an outside source. And the Panamanians already are not trusting the Americans on this. And so you can imagine how they felt with this going on. So, many in Panama saw the pre-1968 rule of the Panamanian oligarchy as an obstacle to more citizens raising above the poverty level. Yeah. Another reason the U.S. was not welcomed on the isthmus was what many locals saw as the large number of bases and facilities. This bolstered the idea that Panama was the territory of the U.S. Yeah. I can understand why the Panamanians would feel that way, and how people outside of the situation, other countries, would see that as well. So that's the history, which doesn't sound too much different than most of our history with other countries that we supposedly helped. But I wanted us to learn at least some background of what happened with this canal. And, you want to know why. Not that. Why did Jimmy Carter, why did he give away the Panama Canal? In a sense that he relinquished U.S. control over the canal without receiving fair compensation or concessions. Instead, he negotiated and signed the Torrijos-Carter treaties in 1977, which transferred control of the Panama Canal to Panama by the end of the 20th century. So, here's the treaties were the result of years of negotiations, as you saw. They addressed concerns about the canal's neutrality, operation, and defense. The agreements were designed to transfer control of the Panama Canal Zone to Panama by December 31st, 1999. Establish Panama as the sovereign authority over the canal, with the United States retaining the right to defend the canal's neutrality. Ensure the canal's continued operation and maintenance by a joint U.S.-Panama Commission. Provide for the gradual transfer of U.S. military personnel and facilities in the canal zone to Panama. Provide for the gradual transfer of U.S. military personnel and facilities in the canal zone to Panama. I'm not really crazy about that. But anyway, I guess they have to have some, supposedly, to defend the neutrality of Panama. So Carter's decision to sign the treaties was motivated by several factors, correcting a historic injustice. The United States had long controlled the Panama Canal despite Panama's sovereignty over the territory. Carter believed it was essential to rectify the situation and recognize Panama's rightful ownership. Improving relations with Panama. The treaties aimed to strengthen ties between the two nations, which had been strained due to U.S. dominance over the canal. And then ensuring the canal's neutrality. By transferring control to Panama, Carter hoped to prevent the canal from becoming a flashpoint for conflict or a tool for political coercion. Security concerns. The treaties acknowledged the canal's defense was essential for international trade and security, and that a joint U.S.-Panama approach would be more effective than continued U.S. control. Meeting international pressures, U.S. faced growing criticism from other nations for its continued control over the canal, and the treaties helped to alleviate this pressure. So, let's go over this. The history started where the U.S. helped the Army Corps of Engineers, and as I mentioned, the others helped to build the Panama Canal, worked with the Panamanians, helped to make their country, an independent, sovereign country. But however, they never totally were uninvolved or real just partners with Panama. It felt more like the Panamanians felt more like they were being under the thumb of the U.S. government, especially with all the military bases there, and the military and the employees there that were not Panamanian. Even though there were 70% Panamanians, there were still our military bases there. So that's the main thing that we got out of that. Why Jimmy Carter did what he did. I guess to, as we said, to make the relations better and to settle this dispute that had been going on for a few decades. So, why are we interested still in this? Okay, so I'm going to give you the reason why why Trump is bringing this up now, because my first thought is, well, that's not, you're going to get you're going to get it back. You're going to get the Panama Canal back, even though the current president said we're not giving up our sovereignty, which, again, they know their history and they understand that. And Trump's like, no, we need to get that back. Well, it all has to do, of course, with China, because China has the canal's expansion in 2016, the waterway annually registers nearly 14,000 transits, a value equal to 6% of global trade. United States remains the top user of the canal. In 2019, 66% of the cargo traffic transiting the canal began or ended its journey at a U.S. port. Cargo from destined to China made up 13% of canal traffic. Still, China is the primary source of products going through the colon free trade zone, and its increasing presence in and around the canal has made the waterway a flashpoint for U.S.-China competition over spheres of influence. It grew in China's influence over the canal grew in 2017 when then President Carlos Varela severed diplomatic ties with Taiwan and recognized China, further opening the door to China's expanded footprint in critical canal infrastructure and laying the groundwork for alignment with the Belt and Road Initiative. As we know, that's China's main goal, is the Belt and Road Initiative. And I think BRICS plays into that as well. And I just think that that's the obvious reason why China is doing these things, okay? And it goes on to say that the United States, however, reserved the right to exert military force in defense of the Panama Canal against any threat to its neutrality. They think that any interpreted Chinese threat to the canal's neutrality could activate the U.S. forces through this treaty, meaning current and future Chinese interventions should be calculated with this potential response in mind. Well, there's that problem. That's part of the issue here, okay? Let's see. What is China's influence in the Panama Canal? Well, they have it's heavily involved in infrastructure-related contracts in and around the canal, in Panama, in Panama's logistics, electricity, and construction sectors. These projects fit naturally with China's BRI vision, onto which Panama was the first Latin American country to sign in 2018. Now, this, along with Panama's recognition of China, boosted China's already existent footprint in the canal, and Chinese companies have since positioned themselves at either end of the Panama Canal through port concession agreements. So they did a China-based land bridge group, acquired 2016 $900 million deal, and they acquired control of the Margarita Island, Panama's largest port at the Atlantic side and in the colon free trade zone, the largest free trade zone in the Western Hemisphere. So they This deal established the Panama Canal container port as a deep water port of megaships. So it goes on and on. They have a lot of different things that are their company, the Chinese companies that are involved in this are in this area, this port. And like C.K. Hutchison Holdings, which serves as operator for the ports of Balboa and Cristobal, two major hubs of the canal's Pacific and Atlantic outlets. So they have these contracts, canal's fourth bridge, and all this. There's a lot of things that China has gotten involved in that area. And it all has to do, again, with their Belt and Road Initiative, okay? The new Silk Road. So, okay, so let's just go with what the implications are. China's BRI expansion into port-related facilities has stirred alarm for the United States over ambitions seen as endangering the neutrality of the canal. Of those goods transiting the canal, over 60% originate in or end up in U.S. markets, intrinsically tying free and fair canal access to U.S. national security and economic interests in the country. Accordingly, the canal is a major commercial asset acting as gateway between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans and a provider of lower shipping costs for U.S. and global trade. So with the expansion of Chinese influence in the waterway, the canal will likely continue to be a point of tension in U.S.-China relations. China does not operate the canal. It only manages the two ports on either end, meaning it does not interact or influence all goods transiting the canal. However, the increase of Chinese companies' control over transshipment cargo operations bound for the United States and other countries is a point of contention. So, let me go on about that. So we're going to see how the U.S. government, can the U.S. government integrate the Panama Canal into a broader Central America strategy. The Panama Canal remains a central piece of the U.S.-Panama bilateral relationship, while the United States' strategy towards Central America remains focused on the Northern Triangle. It also provides support to other Central American nations, including Panama, to address economic, security, and governance challenges. Through this policy framework, the Panama Canal could be tied into a broader Central America's strategy due to its deep ties to Panamanian economic prosperity as well as security and rule of law elements. A strategy that seeks to increase U.S. investment and broad-based economic and infrastructure engagement in the canal fits into the broader U.S. goal of utilizing economic and potential influence for countering Chinese influence in the region. Okay, so what is important in this article is why the U.S. is concerned about what's going on with the Chinese involvement in the Panama Canal, which has obviously been going on for quite a while here, in the 2000s, which seems to be after the 1999 treaty about that. And, China's doing its usual thing. It's making business deals all around the world. It's doing this because they want to get their Belt and Road Initiative done. I can see now, reading this, why the U.S. is concerned. There is a problem with the reason why this is important and why the U.S. is afraid of the China's Belt Road, okay? The U.S. is concerned about the BRI's potential to reshape the global and economic and potential landscape in ways that favor China's interests and undermine American influence. So there's the political advantages. The BRI is seen as a means for China to expand its geopolitical influence, particularly in the global south, and undermine the security and economic architecture of the international order. The U.S. fears that China's increased presence in these regions will erode American influence and create dependencies on Beijing. So they have the unbalanced developments. The BRI's focus on infrastructure, connectivity, particularly in coastal provinces, that led to concerns about uneven development within China. The U.S. worries that this imbalance will perpetuate regional disparities and create new economic and social challenges. The debt risk That's really a big deal. The BRI's financing model, relying heavily on state-owned enterprises and debt, raises concerns about the sustainability of the initiative. The U.S. fears that recipient countries may become overburdened with debt, compromising their economic sovereignty and potentially creating a new wave of debt crisis. I think that's also one of the main issues. China's plans to expand digital connectivity through the BRI, including digital finance and e-commerce platforms, are viewed with unease by the U.S. and its allies. They worry about potential risks to Western commercial interests, internet openness, and control over data. And then the whole thing about that. This is very important, so we understand why Donald Trump is looking at this. He sees the concerns as as a businessman. He's going to see this as well, just like China's doing their business. And if you're looking at this if you were looking outside of being an American citizen, you would see, okay, well, yeah, China is becoming the main, the highest economic, the most powerful economic country eventually, and the U.S. does not want to give up its spot as top most powerful country in the world. Now, as an American citizen, you can understand why the U.S. is worried about this. As was described here. So my first thought when I heard Trump saying, oh, yeah, we got to get that back, he didn't really explain why, so it just sounded like some kind of imperialistic battle cry in his posting of this, which I don't have it up anymore. I thought I had it up, but I don't. Let me see if I can bring this up. Okay. This is what Donald Trump said. Merry Christmas to all, including to the wonderful soldiers of China who are lovingly but illegally operating the Panama Canal, where we lost 38,000 people in its building 110 years ago, always making certain that the United States puts in billions of dollars in repair money, but will have absolutely nothing to say about anything. So that's what he says basically about that. He gets into the Greenland thing, and he goes on about Justin Trudeau in Canada. Citizens' taxes are far too high, and all of this. Again, he's going on about Canada. He's going on about all these places, and I think it all has to do with what I was just discussing and I read to you, having to do with the worry about where our country is going to be after, with all of this China's Belt Road initiative. So, I'm going to end this video now because it's probably gone on and on and on, and I hope I didn't put you all to sleep with all this information, but it was vital information to understand what's going on and why Trump is all of a sudden saying, oh, we have to get, we need to get the canal back. Well, we need to know why that was. So I explained the history of all that for you. I hope that was helpful to you and that it was educational. I learned a lot. Perhaps some of you already knew some of this, but for me, it was educational. If you like my content, please follow my channel, like my videos, share my channel. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe and like my channel, my videos, and please share your thoughts. And this is the first part. I'll get to the second part with Greenland in my next video because this has gone on and on and on. So until next time. We'll see you in a little later.